We haven't committed to the fact that there will be no deaths here. Definitely zero, let's say at a complete level. But in terms of gang violence, which is the ones that contributed to the vast majority of homicides in our country, it has decreased. We believe it's working. They say that if you decide to take the path of crime, you can only end up one of two ways, in prison or dead. And boy did old Lin manage to escape this rule for years. However, death came to him in the worst way you could imagine. So horrible that at his funeral, they didn't even allow anyone to see him, since they hadn't even left his face. What were his death and funeral like? Stay until the end of the video and find out. He who kills hero dies. This is what has been said since ancient times, and that when a person takes the path of evil, it is what is repeated to drug traffickers who are just starting out in that world. Just as they take the lives of thousands of people along the way, they also slowly dig their own grave, where sooner or later they end up meeting an end just like the people they once killed in cold blood, without any mercy. Old Lin was no exception to this rule. The same thing happened to him, since among the little information available about him, it was revealed that the police arrived too late to be able to take down the well-known leader of the Maras, since the Zetas group arrived early to capture and subsequently kill the man who once caused them so much trouble. Although there is no official video, a couple of videos have become popular in the last week in which you can clearly see Old Man Lin's face begging for mercy and human empathy. But as if dealing with wild animals, the mercy shown to the poor man is little to none. His funeral, given the life of luxury and excess Old Man Lin led in life, a funeral of the same kind was expected. However, after the tragic and horrible death he suffered, the family decided to hold a very small and private service, where no one was allowed to open the coffin, since there lay only the remains of a man who had seen hell firsthand before his death. This is because the torture he was subjected to was not abnormal. It was horrifying to see. For all those unfortunate enough to see his lifeless body when he was sent away. For many, his death was a great relief. For others, it was the worst thing in the world. However, it was impressive to see how, with the flick of his fingers, he stopped the world and everything he desired, only to become a sack of bones and flesh, with not even a recognizable face left. What was old Lin's life like? Lin was born in a slum in San Salvador, amid the poverty and hopelessness that plagued many communities in El Salvador. From an early age, Lin witnessed the violence and injustice that plagued his environment, marked by the omnipresent gangs and the lack of opportunities for young people like him. As Lin grew older, he became increasingly drawn to the gang world, which offered a sense of belonging and protection in a dangerous and hostile environment. He joined the Mara Salvatrucha MS-13, one of the largest and most violent gangs in El Salvador, and quickly proved to be a charismatic and cunning leader. Under Lin's leadership, the MS-13 grew in size and power, extending its influence through violence and intimidation. Lin was known for his ruthlessness and willingness to use extreme violence to maintain control over his territory and members. However, as the MS-13 gained power, so did the attention of authorities and society at large. Lin became a prime target for law enforcement, who saw him as one of the main perpetrators of the rising wave of violence in El Salvador. Despite constant pressure from the authorities, Lin managed to maintain his position as leader of the MS-13 for many years, consolidating his power and reputation as one of the gang's most influential leaders. Under his leadership, the MS-13 became a force to be reckoned with in El Salvador, extending its influence across the country and beyond its borders. However, Lin's life was also marked by betrayal and violence. In his quest for power and control, Lin faced numerous internal and external challenges, including power struggles within the gang and attacks from rival gangs and law enforcement. What was the old Lin's luxurious life like? One of the most notable aspects of Lin's luxurious life was his residence. Lin lived in an impressive mansion located in an exclusive area of San Salvador. The mansion was surrounded by high walls and protected by armed guards, reflecting the status and Lin's Influence within MS-13. The house boasted every imaginable amenity, including a swimming pool, gym, game room, and extensive gardens. In addition to his impressive residence, Lin also enjoyed a vast collection of luxury vehicles. He owned a fleet of high-end cars that included luxury sports cars, SUVs, and off-road trucks. These vehicles were not only status symbols, but also important tools in his lifestyle, which often involved traveling quickly and safely across the country. Clothing was another important aspect of Lin's luxurious life. He dressed in designer clothes from the most exclusive brands, sporting elegant suits and high-quality accessories. His style of dress was a further demonstration of his status and power within the MS-13, and also allowed him to stand out and be recognized wherever he went. In addition to these material luxuries, Lin also enjoyed an active and glamorous social life. He hosted exclusive parties and events at his mansion, which were attended by gang members as well as influential people in Salvadoran society. These parties were opportunities to display his power and wealth, and also to consolidate his position within the MS-13. However, despite all these luxuries and comforts, Lin's life was also marked by paranoia and constant fear. He knew that his position as leader of the MS-13 made him a target for authorities and rival gangs, and he lived under the constant threat of violence and betrayal. By the way, if you're enjoying the video, we invite you to give us a like and activate notifications so you don't miss any of our videos. Let's continue. What were the events that marked a before and after in old Lin's life? Number 1. Joining gangs. Lin was just a teenager when he decided to join a gang on the streets of San Salvador. Raised in poverty and violence, Lin saw gangs as a form of protection and belonging. For him, joining a gang was a way to find a place in a world that seemed to be against him. Lin's entry into gangs was a turning point in his life. Suddenly, he found himself immersed in a world of violence and crime that would change his life forever. Gangs gave him a sense of identity and belonging, but they also plunged him into an endless cycle of violence and retaliation. As Lin became more involved in gang life, his reputation grew among his peers and enemies. His courage and determination set him apart, and he soon became one of the most respected and feared members of his gang. However, this rise in the gang hierarchy also led him down a path of increasing violence and criminality. Number 2. Rise to leadership. Lin's rise to leadership of the gangs was an inevitable, gradual process. As he gained a reputation within the gang for courage and determination, Lin rose through the ranks to become one of the most powerful and respected leaders. His leadership was marked by brutality and violence, but also by his ability to keep the gang united and protect its members. Under his leadership, the Maras became a force to be reckoned with in El Salvador, controlling territories and exerting influence over the community. However, Lin's leadership also placed him in the crosshairs of authorities who were relentlessly hunting him down for his crimes. Despite the risks, Lin stood firm in his position, determined to protect his gang and maintain his power at all costs. Number 3. Betrayal by a close ally. One of the most shocking events in Lin's life was the betrayal of a close ally within his gang. This individual, whom Lin had deeply trusted and considered a brother, decided to betray him and reveal crucial information to authorities in exchange for personal benefits. The betrayal of this close ally was a devastating blow to Lin. He felt betrayed and abandoned by someone he had trusted completely. This betrayal marked a fundamental shift in the way Lin viewed the people around him and led him to adopt a more distrustful and distant attitude toward others. Number 4. Encounter with an innocent victim. During one of his forays into a rival gang's territory, Lin encountered a young woman and her young son, caught in the middle of the conflict. The terrified and desperate woman begged Lin not to harm them, explaining that she and her son were innocent and had nothing to do with the gangs. This encounter left a deep impression on Lin. For the first time, he came face to face with the real and devastating impact of his actions on innocent people. This event led him to question his actions and motivations and made him realize the harm he was causing to people who had nothing to do with gang life. The Bukele administration had implemented a series of drastic measures to dismantle gang power. Raids and arrests became the norm, and prisons were overcrowded with gang members. Bukele had publicly stated that he would not rest until El Salvador was free from the influence of the Mara and other criminal organizations. However, the elder Lin was not easily intimidated. From his cell in a maximum security prison, he continued to direct his gang's operations with an iron fist. The government's attempts to dismantle his organization had only made Lin more cautious and strategic. One night, while the city slept, a secret meeting was held in a safe house in the slums of San Salvador. The Mara's leaders had gathered to discuss their next move. Elder Lin, with his imposing presence and penetrating gaze, led the meeting. President Bukele thinks he can destroy us with his raids and arrests, Lin said, his voice echoing in the small room. But he doesn't understand that we're more than a gang. The leaders nodded, their faces filled with determination. Lin knew that to counter the government's offensive, they needed to be smarter and more organized. They decided to intensify their operations, attacking not only law enforcement, but also those who supported Bukele. Meanwhile, at the presidential palace, Bukele was aware of the Mara's movements. He had received intelligence reports indicating an increase in the gang's activity. He knew Lin was planning something big and couldn't afford to underestimate him. We need to get ahead of them, Bukele told his security team. Lin is dangerous, but not invincible. We must dismantle his network from within. Bukele ordered a series of covert operations to infiltrate the gang and gather vital information. Government agents began to move stealthily, trying to gain the trust of the Mara members. At the same time, Bukele intensified his media campaign, ensuring that the Salvadoran people knew he was doing everything possible to protect them. The tension on the streets of San Salvador was palpable. Clashes between law enforcement and gang members became more frequent and violent. Nighttime raids and covert operations put the city on constant alert. One night, during one of these raids, government special forces managed to capture one of Lin's trusted agents. Under intense pressure, the lieutenant revealed crucial details about the gang's plans and Lin's hideouts. With this information in hand, Bukele saw an opportunity to strike a decisive blow. The operation to capture Lin was carried out with military precision. Special forces stormed Lin's hideout in the early hours of the morning, surprising the gang. After a brief but intense firefight, the old man Lin was captured. News of his capture spread quickly, and the entire city felt a mixture of relief and fear of retaliation. Hell in prison. From day one, Lin realized that the prison system was designed to break the strongest men. The guards, following strict orders, made sure that Lin knew that here he wouldn't have the power or influence he had on the streets. He was led to his cell with his hands and feet chained, his dignity crushed with every step he took. In his cell, Lin found a small, dark, and dirty. The bed was a hard wooden board, and the toilet was a simple bucket. There was no privacy, and light only came in through a small, barred window. The loneliness was crushing, but it was only the beginning. The guards made it their personal mission to break Lin. They would wake him up at all hours of the night, banging on the bars with their batons and hurling insults and threats. During meals, they made sure to serve him the worst pieces of food, which were often cold and rotten. Every interaction with the guards was a test of endurance. And Lin knew that any sign of weakness would be ruthlessly exploited. The other prisoners, many of whom were from rival gangs, also saw Lin as a perfect target. Rumors of his downfall had spread quickly, and for them, Lin was an opportunity to build a reputation. In the first few days, Lin had to defend himself against attacks. Constance, he used his skills and cunning to survive. The fights were fierce and bloody. And although Lin managed to emerge victorious, each confrontation left his body more bruised and his hatred deeper. In those moments of loneliness and pain, Lin thought of Bukele. Every blow, every insult, every sleepless night fueled his resentment. He knew his suffering was part of the president's strategy to weaken the Mara. But Lin wouldn't break so easily. His mind worked tirelessly, plotting revenge and how to restore his power. One of the most humiliating moments for Lin came when the guards decided to teach him a lesson. They took him to an isolated section of the prison, where he was handcuffed and brutally beaten. The blows were relentless, and the guards made sure each one left a mark. Lin, although in pain, didn't utter a single cry, resisting with a strength that only intensified his hatred. The weeks passed, and Lin grew accustomed to the brutality. His body, although wounded, grew stronger with each day. He kept his mind sharp, remembering every detail of his torture, every face of the guards, every insult. He knew revenge wouldn't be quick or easy, but he was determined to strike back in a way that Bukele would never forget. By the way, if you're enjoying the video, we invite you to give us a like and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our new videos. Continued. The message from the old Lina Bukele. The days in prison turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. The old man, hardened by the brutality of prison, hadn't lost an ounce of his cunning and determination. Every blow, every insult, and every attempt to break him only served to reinforce his hatred for President Nayib Bukele. Despite the strict security measures and constant surveillance, Lin had managed to establish a communication network with his loyalists on the outside. His former gang comrades, still operating in the shadows of San Salvador, were willing to do whatever was necessary to restore their leader's power. One day, while in his cell, Lin received a signal from one of the guards, a man he had managed to bribe through his external network. The guard slipped a small note under his cell door, informing him that everything was ready to send a message to Bukele. Lin smiled, knowing this would be the first step in his plan for revenge. With the cunning that had made him the feared leader of the Mara, Lin devised a plan to get his message across to the president. Using codes and coded messages, Lin sent detailed instructions to his men abroad. The message had to be clear and forceful, a direct warning to Bukele that his capture did not mean the end. One night, under the cover of darkness, Lin's loyalists infiltrated the city with clockwork precision and executed their plan. Within hours, graffiti appeared at several strategic points in San Salvador, all with the same message: Bukele, this is not over. I will escape and come for you. Lin. The message spread like wildfire. The citizens of San Salvador woke up to the news and the images of the graffiti. The media covered the story extensively, speculating about the implications of the threat. Tensions in the city increased, and security around the president was further tightened. At the presidential palace, Bukele received the news with a mixture of surprise and fury. He couldn't believe that Lin had managed to send him a threat from the maximum security prison. This display of power and resilience from Elder Lin was a direct affront to his authority and a reminder that the fight against the gangs was far from over. Bukele called an emergency meeting with his security team. This man remains a threat. Even behind bars, Bukele said, his voice filled with determination. We cannot allow his followers to maintain this communication network. I want them to redouble their efforts to completely isolate him. Meanwhile, in his cell, Lin learned of the impact of his message. Through his contacts inside the prison, he learned that Bukele had increased security measures and that the government was on high alert. Lin allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He had managed to send his warning and plant the seed of fear in the heart of his enemy. But the message wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. Lin continued to meticulously plan his escape. He knew it would be a long and dangerous process, but he was determined to make good on his threat. With each passing fall, he worked to strengthen his network inside and outside the prison, bribing guards, manipulating other prisoners, and using every resource at his disposal. The guards, although more vigilant than ever, were unable to stop Lin. His network of loyalists expanded, and communication was maintained. Every small success, every message sent and received, gave him more confidence and fueled his determination. Lin knew his escape was possible, and with each passing day, his plan drew closer to execution. Outside, gang violence increased, partly as a distraction and partly as a show of power. The gangs, following Lin's orders, intensified their activities, keeping the government occupied and drawing attention away from their leaders' true plans. The city descended into controlled chaos, all while Lin moved his chess pieces from inside his cell. Finally, the day came when Lin felt ready to execute his escape. Weeks of planning, bribery, and manipulation culminated in a dark and stormy night. With the help of his allies, inside and outside prison, Lin managed to escape, leaving behind a trail of chaos and confusion. When news of Lin's escape reached Bukele, his face darkened. He knew this was only the beginning. Lin was free, and with his freedom came the promise of revenge. The battle between the president and the Mara leader was far from over, and Salvador was preparing for a new era of conflict where cunning and determination would decide the fate of a nation.